Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So imagine you are walking into an electronics store. Let's say you're in rural Bihar, and you're looking to buy a basic sub 10,000 rupee smartphone, right?
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and you saved up for months for this. But when you get to the counter, the shopkeeper tells you the price is nearly doubled,
Wow.
right? And why? Well, because a tech billionaire in California just decided to build a massive artificial intelligence supercomputer. And his data center basically bought up all the silicon memory chips your budget phone needed.
It's crazy to think about.
It really is. Your wallet, thousands of miles away, just took a direct hit from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and the modern world is not just a series of isolated events anymore. It is this intensely fragile, deeply interconnected supply chain.
Absolutely.
And the intelligence notes we have for today, dated May 26, 2026, they really expose the hidden wiring of that entire global system.
They do.
Because when you pull a thread in one hemisphere, an institution or a currency or, a whole community unravels in another.
Exactly. And that is basically our mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
For you listening, we are going to look at 8 distinct, highly volatile situations unfolding right now.
Right.
We're going to decode the underlying mechanics of these events so you can see exactly how the gears of global policy and technology are actually turning.
And we have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We are mapping out the systemic failure of a massive national exam, the cascading mathematics of your fuel bill, the rapid deflation of the Indian rupee, and, that specific semiconductor crisis I just mentioned.
Which is a huge one.
Huge. And then we'll look at how shifting demographics are rewriting the rules for women in the workforce, examine a digital grading disaster in our schools, unpack the physics and financials of a $1.75 trillion space IPO.
Trillion with a T, yeah.
With a T. And finally, navigate the fierce new geopolitics of global tech alliances.
So we are really dissecting the how and the why of these systemic failures and transitions because, understanding the mechanisms behind these headlines is really the only way to anticipate what breaks next.
Definitely. So let's just jump right in. Let's unpack the first major system failure. And this one involves an institution that millions of young people trusted with their futures.
The NEET exam?
Yeah. The NEET UG 2026 paper leak and the National Testing Agency, the NTA. The scene in the Supreme Court on May 25 was incredibly intense.
It was. Justices Narasimha and Arafe were not holding back.
Not at all. They sharply rebuked the NTA. The NEET UG exam, which was taken by roughly 25 lakh candidates earlier in the month, was completely canceled.
25 lakh students, just imagine the anxiety.
It's heartbreaking. And it all happened because a physics paper leaked via Telegram and WhatsApp. And they traced it back to a school employee in Pune named Sneha Havaldar.
Right, and the Supreme Court's frustration was so palpable because this is a recurring institutional breakdown. We've seen this movie before.
Exactly, like in 2024.
Right. So the court explicitly demanded an affidavit proving the NTA's compliance with the K. Radhakrishnan Committee recommendations.
Ah, right, Dr. Radhakrishnan.
Yeah, the former ISRO chief. He was tasked with auditing the NTA after those catastrophic leaks in 2024. And 18 months ago, his committee handed the NTA a highly specific technical blueprint to prevent this exact scenario from happening again.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of that blueprint for the listener.
Yeah.
Because moving physical question papers for 25 lakh students is, it's a logistical nightmare.
It's massive.
It's kind of like a central bank trying to securely transport cash to thousands of ATMs simultaneously.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Right. Except every single ATM needs to be stocked at the exact same minute, and the cash is completely worthless if anyone even peeks at it beforehand.
Yeah, and the logistics chain of a physical paper exam is just inherently vulnerable. Think about it. A secure printing press prints millions of booklets.
Yeah.
Those are transported in sealed trunks to regional hubs, which are often bank vaults. Then on the morning of the exam, city coordinators have to move those trunks to individual schools.
So there are just so many points of failure.
Exactly. The Radhakrishnan Committee recognized that the final mile, the school principal or the local employee receiving that physical packet, that is the critical weak point. You simply cannot build a perfect, watertight security apparatus inside thousands of varying private and public schools.
So what was the committee's solution? They proposed eliminating that physical final mile entirely, right?
They did. They recommended encrypted digital delivery. So instead of a physical booklet sitting in a school vault overnight, the question paper exists only as an encrypted file on a secure central server.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then literally minutes before the exam begins, the decryption key is transmitted to secure printers located inside the actual examination centers, that the papers are printed in real time, right in front of the invigilator.
That makes so much sense.
And on top of that, the committee also mandated multi-layer biometric authentication for every single candidate to prevent impersonation.
Like iris scans and stuff.
Yes, cross-referencing iris scans and fingerprints with Aadhaar databases in real time.
But based on the Poon arrest, the NTA, clearly, they failed to implement that real-time encrypted printing.
Clearly.
A school employee gained physical access to the paper early enough to photograph it and upload it to Telegram, which brings up this massive policy debate that's currently raging among groups like the Federation of All India Medical Association.
Right, about the NTA's capacity.
Exactly. The NTA was only established in 2017, and they are now conducting over 15 national-level exams. Is it possible that their operational mandates simply outpaced their technological and administrative capacity?
Well, I mean, scaling a high-stakes assessment architecture requires a permanent, highly trained cybersecurity and logistics cadre.
It's not a part-time job.
No, but the NTA heavily relies on outsourced vendors, ad hoc city coordinators, and borrowed school infrastructure. When you outsource the execution of an assessment that governs 25 lakh futures, you inherently outsource the accountability.
Right. Now, the proposed technological fix being debated heavily in the sources is a complete shift to CBT computer-based testing.
Yes, going completely digital.
And the logic makes sense on the surface. If you eliminate physical paper entirely, there's nothing to photograph. Plus, a central server can randomize the questions.
Exactly.
If every single student in a massive testing hall is looking at a completely different set of questions, a leaked answer key becomes completely useless, right?
That's the theory. The randomization algorithm of a robust CBT system pulls from a dynamic question bank of tens of thousands of validated items.
Wow, okay.
It ensures that while the specific questions differ for everyone, the overall difficulty level remains statistically identical for every candidate. This essentially neutralizes the incentive for organized cheating rings.
Okay, I understand the security argument, but let's push back on the equity of this solution.
Sure.
We are talking about NEET. This is the absolute sole gateway to a medical degree in India. If you mandate CBT, you aren't just testing a student's grasp of organic chemistry anymore.
You're testing their digital fluency.
Exactly. Consider a rural candidate whose school doesn't even have a functional computer lab. They might be taking a high-stakes exam using a mouse and a scrolling interface for the very first time in their life.
While an urban candidate has been navigating iPads since they were toddlers.
Right, so the medium of the assessment introduces a massive structural bias.
The digital divide is absolutely the primary friction point here. Transitioning to CBT without first ensuring universal access to digital literacy programs basically penalizes poverty.
It really does.
The Supreme Court petitions argue this under Article 14, the right to equality, and Article 21, the right to dignity and education. A meritocratic assessment has to isolate the variable it intends to measure, in this case, scientific aptitude. If the testing interface creates a huge cognitive load for rural students because they are struggling with the digital navigation itself, well, then the exam ceases to be an equal measure of merit.
And, the recently passed Public Examinations Act of 2024, which threatens a decade in prison and massive fines that clearly didn't act as a deterrent in Coon.
Not at all.
So the issue isn't the penalty, it's the systemic vulnerability.
Yeah.
And this loss of faith in the institutions governing our youth, it perfectly mirrors a loss of faith in the systems governing our daily economy.
That's a good point.
Let's pivot to a different kind of systemic shock. The harsh new economics of your morning commute. The freeze on domestic fuel prices has definitively ended.
It has. The data rolling in from the state-run oil marketing companies, so that's Indian Oil, BPCL, and HPCL, it indicates a severe market correction.
The retail numbers are just brutal. For you listening, we are looking at a RS 7.5 to RS 8 per liter cumulative hike across petrol and diesel in less than 2 weeks.
In just 2 weeks.
This is the fourth consecutive hike. Delhi petrol has breached Rs 102. Mumbai is sitting over Rs 111.
Oh,
And this follows a massive 4-year period from 2022 to 2026 where domestic fuel prices remained almost entirely static, despite unprecedented global supply chain chaos and wars.
right.
So why, exactly at this moment, are we seeing the steepest 10-day price increase since 2022?
Well, the fundamental mechanism of fuel pricing in India is this constant tension between economic theory and political reality. Officially, India operates on what's called dynamic fuel pricing.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means the retail cost at the pump is supposed to be calculated daily, pegging it directly to the international benchmark price of unrefined crude oil and the current rupee-dollar exchange rate.
But the OMCs are majority owned by the government.
Exactly.
So the government can essentially tell them to ignore the dynamic pricing algorithm to shield the consumer, right?
That is exactly what happens. The political directive often supersedes the economic algorithm. Leading up to major electoral cycles, the government leveraged the OMCs as an inflationary shock absorber.
I see.
When global crude prices spiked, the OMCs were instructed to freeze retail prices. So they bought crude at incredibly high international rates, refined it, and sold it to Indian consumers at a massive discount.
Let's explain the accounting term for that, because I read the phrase under recovery in the sources. It sounds like a mild clerical error, but it's actually describing a corporate financial hemorrhage, right?
Yes, under recovery is a very polite term for taking a massive loss. It's the specific monetary difference between the required retail price, meaning the price that covers raw crude, ocean freight, refining margins, and transport, and the suppressed price mandated by the state.
So how bad are the numbers?
Well, BPCL's recent disclosures show that even after implementing these 4 recent hikes, they are still taking a revenue loss of Rs 25 to Rs 30 on every single liter of diesel sold.
Wait, really? Even at Rs 102 a liter, they are losing money. The scale of that backlog must be immense.
It's staggering. The cumulative under-recovery burden for the OMCs for the financial year 2026 is projected to hit an unsustainable Rs 80,000 to Rs 90,000 crore.
Good grief.
Historically, the government issued oil bonds or direct subsidy top-ups to plug those holes, but current fiscal deficit targets limit that kind of intervention. So with the major national and state electoral cycles concluded, the political imperative shifted.
From shielding the consumer to basically repairing the decimated balance sheets of the OMCs.
Precisely.
But it's not just a matter of paying off old debts, is it? The current geopolitical landscape is actively pushing the raw material costs higher right now. The source is highly focused on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the most critical maritime choke point in the global energy supply chain. And because of the escalating U.S.-Iran conflict, commercial transit through the strait has been functionally paralyzed since February 2026. This geographical bottleneck has trapped massive volumes of Middle Eastern oil, pushing the benchmark Brent crude price above $115 a barrel, and India imports nearly 70% of its crude requirements, predominantly navigating through that exact region.
So when you combine a severed global supply line with a domestic financial dam breaking, the impact just radiates through the entire economy.
It touches everything.
Let's trace the inflation cascade for the listener. Because Rs 7.5 hike in diesel doesn't just affect the middle-class citizen driving a diesel sedan.
Not at all. Diesel is the absolute bedrock of India's macroeconomic logistics. Consider the journey of, say, agricultural produce.
Okay.
A farmer in Maharashtra uses a diesel-powered tractor for harvesting. The produce is moved into a diesel-powered cold storage facility.
Right.
It is then loaded onto a heavy-duty freight truck, which burns diesel across national highways to reach a wholesale market in Delhi.
So every single step in that chain just became significantly more expensive.
Exactly. Macroeconomists calculate that this specific magnitude of fuel hike will inject an immediate 1.5% to 2% increase into baseline transport and logistics costs nationwide.
And who pays for that?
The end consumer. They bear the entirety of that burden. Projections indicate this will trigger a secondary spike in food inflation, estimating a 0.8% to 1.2% jump over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Just from the diesel hike alone.
Yes. It also severely pressures the rural agricultural sector right as they enter the Kharif sowing season because the operational input costs for irrigation pumps have surged too.
But the global price of a barrel of oil is only one side of the equation. The other, perhaps a more terrifying variable, is the currency we are forced to use to buy that oil.
The dollar?
Right. We purchase global crude in U.S. dollars. If our currency weakens, the oil becomes vastly more expensive, even if the barrel price stays flat. Let's look at the staggering depreciation of the Indian rupee.
The currency metrics really depict a perfect macroeconomic storm right now.
In March 2025, the exchange rate was hovering around Rs 85.5 to a single US dollar. By May 2026, we are looking at a volatile spread between Rs 95 and Rs 97 per dollar.
It's a huge shift.
That is a 14% devaluation in just 14 months. It is one of the most aggressive, sustained downward slides in recent economic memory. And the counterintuitive part is that India's domestic GDP grew at a robust 7.6% this year.
Right. The economy is growing.
The domestic economy is expanding, yet the currency is sinking. Why?
Well, currency valuation is dictated by the fundamental laws of supply and demand on the global foreign exchange market. The sources identify 5 compounding external pressures that are essentially draining dollars out of the Indian economy, thereby reducing the value of the rupee.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first is directly tied to the oil crisis we just discussed.
Right. Because Brent crude is above $115, Indian refiners have to enter the foreign exchange market, dump massive amounts of rupees, and buy billions of US dollars to pay their Gulf suppliers.
Exactly. The mathematics of that oil import bill are brutal. For every $10 increase in the global price of a barrel of oil, India's current account deficit expands by an estimated $12 to $14 billion annually.
Wow, that's a massive drain.
It represents an enormous, relentless demand for dollars, which inherently depresses the relative value of the rupee.
And if oil is the primary drain on our dollar reserves, the second factor is the sudden exit of foreign investors. The data shows foreign portfolio investors, or FPIs, have pulled between $17 and $19 billion out of Indian markets in the 2026 financial year.
Yeah, FPI capital is notoriously sensitive. The geopolitical instability causing the oil shock creates a global risk-off sentiment.
Meaning they get spooked.
Right. Institutional investors liquidate their holdings in emerging markets like India and retreat to the perceived absolute safety of U.S. Treasury bonds.
Which brings us to the third factor, the underlying mechanism pulling that investor money away. Let's look at the yield spread. Think of global capital as a metal ball bearing and national interest rates as magnets. Historically, to attract foreign money, the Reserve Bank of India offered a significantly higher interest rate on government bonds compared to the U.S. Federal Reserve. That high interest rate was a strong magnet.
It facilitated what is known as the carry trade. Institutional investors would borrow capital at near zero interest rates in developed economies and invest it in high-yielding Indian bonds, profiting off the difference.
But the U.S. Federal Reserve has maintained aggressively high interest rates to combat their own domestic inflation.
Yes, they have.
So the gap, the yield spread between India's 10-year benchmark bond and the U.S. 10-year Treasury, has compressed to a mere 250 basis points, or 2.5%. Our financial magnet has lost its pull. Why take the perceived risk of an emerging market currency fluctuation when you can get an almost identical return backed by the U.S. government?
Exactly. The narrowing yield spread systematically dismantles the incentive for foreign capital retention. And then the fourth factor exacerbating the dollar shortage is trade policy.
And tariffs.
Right. The aggressive tariff regime imposed by the United States in 2025, specifically the 25% base penalty, coupled with a 50% conditional tariff on Indian exports, has severely restricted our dollar earning capacity.
How bad was the hit?
Nearly 70% of India's export portfolio to the U.S. was compromised.
So fewer dollars entering the economy through exports, massive amounts of dollars leaving the economy to buy expensive oil, and foreign investors packing up their capital.
Which culminates in the fifth factor, a rapidly widening current account deficit, or CAD. The CAD measures the total flow of goods, services, and investments into and out of the country.
And where does it stand?
Estimates project the CAD will expand to 2% or 2.5% of GDP this year, a sharp increase from 1% the previous year. We are structurally hemorrhaging foreign currency.
Now, the Reserve Bank of India isn't a passive observer here. They employ a strategy called a managed float. Let's explain what that intervention actually looks like mechanically. When the rupee starts going into a free fall, how does the RBI use its foreign exchange reserves to starve it?
Well, in a pure free-floating currency market, the exchange rate is determined entirely by private buyers and sellers. But under a managed float, the central bank actively participates in the open market.
Okay, how?
When the rupee depreciates too rapidly, the RBI taps into its strategic foreign exchange reserves. They actively sell billions of US dollars onto the open market while simultaneously buying rupees.
Oh, I see. By artificially flooding the market with dollars, they satisfy the demand of the oil importers and foreign investors which stabilizes the price.
Exactly. Since February, the RBI has depleted an estimated $20 to $30 billion of its reserves, specifically to aggressively defend the rupee.
That's a lot of money to burn through.
It is. They aren't trying to reverse the trend. The macroeconomic forces are too strong for that, but they are engineering a gradual, managed depreciation rather than a catastrophic overnight collapse.
It's a vital defense mechanism. And thankfully, India possesses a substantial buffer, with reserves hovering around $580 to $600 billion.
Very true.
Now, is there any sector of the Indian economy that actually benefits from this currency devaluation? Because it can't be all doom and gloom.
There actually is a distinct silver lining for export-oriented sectors whose billing cycles are denominated entirely in US dollars, but whose operational expenditures like salaries and local real estate are paid in rupees.
Ah, like the IT sector.
Yes. The Indian information technology services sector giants like TCS, Infosys, and Wipro, they realize massive margin expansions. For every 1% depreciation in the rupee, the IT sector collectively adds an estimated $2 to $3 billion to its top-line revenue just upon currency conversion.
That's incredible.
The pharmaceutical manufacturing sector and textile exporters also gain a sudden, massive competitive pricing advantage in the global market.
So while our falling currency earns windfalls for software exporters, it makes importing physical hardware brutally expensive. We import almost all of our oil, but we also import nearly 100% of our advanced silicon. And right now, the global semiconductor market is experiencing a profound supply shock that is threatening the very foundation of India's digital economy. Let's examine the phenomenon of memflation.
Yeah, memflation. It's an industry portmanteau blending memory and inflation. It describes the unprecedented structural price escalation currently paralyzing the global market for semiconductor memory components, specifically DRAM and NAND flash memory.
To understand how memory chips dictate the global economy, we really have to look at the manufacturing architecture. The companies that fabricate these chips, the foundries, operate in an extreme oligopoly.
Yes, just a handful of players.
3 conglomerates, Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, control roughly 95% of the entire global production capacity for DRAM. And late last year, they made a strategic pivot that disrupted the entire tech ecosystem.
They realized they could exponentially increase their profit margins by retooling their fabrication lines.
Right, to produce a highly specialized architecture called high bandwidth memory, or HBM.
And the pivot to HBM is entirely driven by the explosion of generative artificial intelligence. Massive AI data centers require incredibly specialized processors, primarily NVIDIA's advanced GPUs.
The chips that train the big AI model.
Exactly. But a GPU cannot function in isolation. It requires an immense, instantaneous flow of data to train its neural networks. Standard DRAM just cannot move data fast enough. HBM physically stacks memory chips vertically, creating a massive high-speed data highway directly into the processor.
This brings us back to our opening scenario. Why does an AI data center in California make a smartphone in Bihar unaffordable? It basically comes down to the physics of semiconductor fabrication, doesn't it? You can't just build a new factory overnight.
No, fabricating silicon wafers is arguably the most complex manufacturing process on Earth. A new semiconductor fab requires billions of dollars in capital expenditure and several years to construct. Therefore, the total global capacity for printing memory chips is a fixed, finite pie. When Samsung and Micron dedicate massive swaths of their existing cleanroom floors and photolithography machines to printing highly lucrative HBM chips for AI servers, they must fundamentally reduce the production volume of commodity DRAM and NAND chips.
So the supply of the basic memory chips that go into laptops, budget tablets, and entry-level smartphones just plummets.
Precisely.
And when supply artificially constricts, prices hyperinflate. We saw commodity DRAM costs spike by up to 25% almost overnight. Let's look at the devastating bill of materials, or BOM, impact on the Indian market. The IDC data is alarming.
It really is.
Shipments of entry-level smartphones, the crucial sub-$100 sub-Rs 10,000 segment, have collapsed by a staggering 59% year-on-year.
Well, the economics of a budget smartphone are incredibly tight. Manufacturers operate on razor-thin margins. When the cost of the internal memory component surges by 25%, the manufacturer simply cannot absorb that loss.
They have to pass it on.
They are forced to pass the cost directly to the consumer. Consequently, the average selling price of a smartphone in India has surged to a record high of $302. The entire budget segment's market share has aggressively contracted from 18% down to just 8%.
And industry analysts are warning that this isn't a temporary cyclical fluctuation, are they? They are calling it a structural reset.
Yes.
The fear is that the sub-$100 smartphone might simply become permanently uneconomical to produce as AI demand permanently consumes global silicon capacity. This represents an existential crisis for the policy architecture of digital India.
Absolutely. The foundational assumption of India's digital public infrastructure, the Unified Payments Interface, the PM WANI public Wi-Fi network, direct benefit transfers, it's all based on the democratization of access.
Right.
It relies on the absolute premise that a citizen at the bottom of the economic pyramid can actually afford an internet-connected device.
If that device suddenly costs Rs 15,000 instead of Rs 7,000, that digital bridge collapses. We are risking the creation of a massive, permanent underclass of citizens who are technologically locked out of the modern economy.
It's a scary prospect.
And it exposes the severe limitations of our current domestic semiconductor strategy. We celebrate the new Micron plant in Gujarat and Tata's investments, but we need to clarify what those facilities actually do.
We do. India is currently investing heavily in the back end of the semiconductor supply chain, specifically AT&P facilities assembly, testing, marking, and packaging.
Okay, explain what that means.
These plants take silicon wafers that have already been printed abroad, cut them, test them, and put them into protective plastic casings. India does not possess a single operational commercial-scale fabrication plant capable of printing advanced DRAM or NAND memory wafers from scratch.
So we are assembling the puzzle pieces, but we are entirely dependent on foreign oligopolies to actually print them. We are completely captive to the memflation cycle.
Exactly. And when memflation artificially prices millions of citizens out of the digital economy, it systematically prevents them from participating in the modern workforce.
The lack of digital access definitely stalls workforce participation. But, there is a parallel demographic crisis unfolding that threatens the fundamental availability of a workforce entirely.
The demographic shift.
Let's analyze the deeply complex socioeconomic tensions surrounding the prenatalist paradox.
The demographic trajectory of India is fracturing, and it's fracturing along very sharp regional lines.
Let's define the baseline metric first. The total fertility rate, or TFR. This is the average number of children born to a woman over her lifetime.
Right.
Demographers universally recognize a TFR of 2.1 as the replacement level, the exact rate required for a population to remain numerically stable over generations, accounting for mortality. However, the data...
And a TFR significantly below replacement level triggers an inevitable aging population crisis. Over decades, the proportion of elderly citizens requiring pensions and healthcare expands massively, while the base of young, tax-paying workers shrinks.
Which places an unbearable burden on the state's fiscal infrastructure.
Yes. Recognizing this looming demographic winter, political leadership in the South is proposing radical interventions. Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu and others are actively advocating for pro-natalist policies.
Like what?
They are proposing direct financial handouts, increased welfare benefits, and even prioritizing government employment and enhanced pensions for families who choose to have 3 or more children.
From a purely mechanical, demographic management perspective, the intent is clearly to artificially stimulate population growth. However, analyzing these policies through a strict socioeconomic lens reveals a profound paradox, particularly regarding the systemic impact on women.
It really does.
Let's push back on the fundamental premise of a cash for kids policy. We operate in a country with a near-total absence of universal, state-subsidized, high-quality childcare.
That's a huge factor.
If you lack the infrastructure to care for a child while the mother works, offering a lump sum financial incentive for a third pregnancy is functionally equivalent to paying a lower-income woman to permanently exit the formal labor force.
That paradox requires us to really stratify the analysis by economic class. For women in the upper and upper middle economic brackets, expanding a family might be manageable because they can leverage paid maternity leave, employ domestic workers, and access private daycare facilities.
Right. Their career trajectories might pause, but they rarely terminate entirely.
Exactly. But the reality for the vast majority of Indian women is vastly different. India's female labor force participation rate, the FLFPR, is exceptionally low. It's hovering around 35%.
That's incredibly low.
And economists note that much of the recent statistical uptick in that number isn't women entering high-paying corporate jobs. It's distressed employment in the informal agricultural sector due to rural economic pressure.
So for a woman laboring in the informal sector, working as a daily wage earner, a domestic worker, or an agricultural laborer, the pregnancy, coupled with the lack of state child care forces, an absolute exit from employment.
Yes.
If a pronatalist policy offers a cash incentive that roughly equals, say, 6 months of her informal wages, the immediate economic rationale might encourage the pregnancy. But long-term, it permanently traps her within the domestic unpaid care economy.
Which is a devastating long-term outcome. Global sociological data from nations like South Korea and France demonstrates conclusively that direct financial handouts are highly ineffective at sustainably increasing fertility anyway.
Fertility isn't just a financial transaction. It's dictated by structural economic security, shifting social norms, and the systemic empowerment of women. But there is a massive unspoken political engine driving this pronatalist urgency in the southern states, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about pensions. It's about political survival and the looming specter of delimitation.
Delimitation is the key to understanding the political anxiety. It is the constitutional process of redrawing the boundaries of parliamentary constituencies based on the most recent census data, ensuring proportional representation.
But there was a freeze on that.
Right. In 1976, during the emergency, the government imposed a freeze on delimitation. The explicit purpose of this freeze was to ensure that states successfully implementing family planning and reducing their population growth were not politically penalized by losing representation in the Lok Sabha.
So states wouldn't lose seats just because they were doing what the government asked.
Exactly, compared to states whose populations continued to explode.
That freeze was extended, but it is fundamentally tied to the next census. The southern states managed their demographics successfully decades ago. Now they are looking at states in the north, like Bihar with a TFR of 2.8, and Uttar Pradesh, whose populations have surged dramatically in the intervening decades.
And the political anxiety is acute. When delimitation eventually occurs, the proportional mathematics dictate that the southern states will inevitably lose a significant percentage of their Lok Sabha seats.
Which means losing power.
Yes, and consequently, their proportional share of central tax revenue devolutions. The pronatalist push in the South is, in many ways, a panicked attempt to artificially boost population numbers to defend their political and financial leverage against the demographic weight of the North.
So if direct cash handouts are ineffective and economically regressive for women, what is the actual structural solution to the demographic issue?
Policy analysts emphasize that demographic stability is a byproduct of structural support, not financial bribery. The solution requires massively scaling up the Anganwadi system to provide high-quality, universal early childhood care.
Make it easier to have kids and work.
Exactly. It requires mandating flexible work policies and enforcing equitable parental leave in the corporate sector. The ultimate paradox is that the only sustainable method to stabilize a plunging birth rate is to build an economic infrastructure that makes it viable for a woman to have a child without sacrificing her participation in the workforce.
We are fiercely debating the policies required to manage the next generation, yet we simultaneously mismanage the foundational systems governing the current generation of students.
We certainly do.
We analyzed the catastrophic failure of the NTA's physical exam logistics earlier. But replacing physical systems with digital ones is not a guaranteed panacea. Let's examine the massive implementation failure of the CBSE's digital evaluation rollout.
The Central Board of Secondary Education's attempt to digitize its grading architecture serves as a really critical case study in the dangers of deploying unpiloted technology at an unprecedented scale.
The scale is the defining factor here. In 2026, the CBSE mandated a historic shift. For the very first time, they decided to evaluate 98 lakh Class 12 answer scripts entirely digitally.
98 lakh. It's a mountain of paper.
They implemented a system called on-screen marking, or OSM. The theoretical workflow was straightforward. Physical answer booklets are collected, transported to scanning centers, digitized into high-resolution files, and uploaded to a secure, centralized cloud server.
And the administrative logic was sound. By forcing examiners to grade scanned scripts on a digital interface, the software can automatically calculate the final totals,
which theoretically eliminates human calculation errors.
All right. It also allows for the rapid, centralized monitoring of evaluation progress, vastly accelerating the publication of final results.
But the execution was a logistical disaster. Let's use an analogy to understand the technical failure.
Okay.
Imagine trying to build an optical character recognition software, an OCR system designed to read standard typed text. Now force that software to read 98 lakh completely unique variations of teenage handwriting, written in different colored inks under immense time pressure, and pass all those physical pages through a scanner lens that might be smeared or improperly calibrated.
The resulting data is going to be corrupted.
Exactly.
Mm.
The systemic breakdown occurred at multiple distinct points in the architecture.
The first critical failure was the scanning fidelity. The true scale of the disaster became apparent only when results were declared. And panicked, students utilized the right to information process to request digital copies of their evaluated scripts.
Right. Students received PDF files that were fundamentally illegible. Massive sections of handwritten text were heavily blurred, excessively darkened, or faded to the point of being blank.
It was a mess.
The immediate terrifying implication for a student is, if the digital copy provided to me is unreadable, how did the examiner assigning my final marks actually read it on their screen?
That degradation in digital fidelity led directly to the second systemic failure, unevaluated sections. Because the physical booklets had to be unbound and scanned page by page, the digital sequencing frequently fragmented.
Oh, no.
Students published extensive evidence online demonstrating that multi-page, long-form essay answers were disconnected in the digital interface. The examiner graded the first page, but the subsequent pages were never digitally linked or presented on their screen.
So the software just auto-calculated a final score based on fundamentally incomplete grading.
Exactly.
And when a massive, complex digital system fails, you need a robust, high-capacity redressal mechanism. Which brings us to the third catastrophic failure. When lakhs of students realized their marks were structurally flawed, they simultaneously rushed the CBSE's online portal to apply for official reevaluation before the strict deadline expired.
And the server architecture hosting the payment gateway simply collapsed under the concentrated traffic load.
It crashed.
The API calls between the CBSE portal and the banking gateways timed out. Lakhs of students were trapped in a loop of invalid payment errors, completely locked out of the system, desperately watching the deadline expire, unable to legally challenge their erroneous scores.
The Ministry of Education was forced to intervene. The CBSE secretary issued statements attempting to minimize the crisis, claiming their internal audits only flagged approximately 68,000 scanning anomalies, classifying them as isolated incidents.
But the classification of 68,000 errors as isolated completely ignores the human reality of a high-stakes assessment system. In the hyper-competitive landscape of Indian university admissions, a single mark dictates the trajectory of a career.
It really does.
68,000 systemic anomalies represent the potential derailment of tens of thousands of individual futures.
What compounds the negligence is that the CBSE had simultaneously discontinued the traditional mechanism of post-result manual mark verification.
They removed the safety net.
They fundamentally believed their unpiloted software was infallible, proactively dismantling the manual safety net, precisely as millions of students were forced to walk the digital tightrope.
It illustrates the profound danger of technological hubris within state capacity. When a bureaucracy prioritizes the aesthetic of rapid digitization over rigorous, small-scale pilot testing, the end user, in this case, the student, absorbs the entirety of the systemic risk.
It is a sobering reminder that deploying massive, untested digital infrastructure to solve logistical problems on Earth often results in chaos, which provides a fascinating contrast when we look at the private sector, where corporations are actively attempting to deploy massive, untested digital infrastructure into the vacuum of outer space.
The SpaceX IPO.
Let's pivot to the extreme frontier of technological ambition. SpaceX's historic IPO.
The financial magnitude of this corporate maneuver is redefining the boundaries of private market valuation. SpaceX, the aerospace manufacturer founded by Elon Musk, has officially submitted a confidential S-1 prospectus to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, initiating the process for an initial public offering.
And the target valuation they are seeking is $1.75 trillion. Let's contextualize that number. The entire market capitalization of Apple, built over decades of global consumer dominance, fluctuates around $3 trillion.
Right.
The largest IPO in recorded history was the state-owned oil giant Saudi Aramco, which debuted at roughly $1.7 trillion. If institutional investors meet Musk's valuation, SpaceX will execute the most lucrative public offering in the history of global finance.
It's historically massive.
And the core pitch to those investors is no longer just about building reusable rockets.
No. The S-1 filing reveals a fundamental corporate restructuring. In early 2026, SpaceX executed a quiet but massive merger, fully absorbing xAI, Elon Musk's dedicated artificial intelligence research company.
The company behind Grok.
Yes, xAI is the entity responsible for developing the Grok neural network and constructing the massive Colossus supercomputer cluster.
This absorption fundamentally alters the DNA of the company. It transforms SpaceX from an aerospace logistics provider into a vertically integrated behemoth spanning orbital transit, global telecommunications, and advanced artificial intelligence.
And the conceptual bridge connecting these divisions is Musk's proposal for orbital data centers.
The public relations narrative is extraordinary. Musk is advocating for the deployment of millions of high-performance AI servers into low Earth orbit by 2028. The stated rationale is resource circumvention. Terrestrial AI data centers consume staggering amounts of electricity and require massive physical footprints.
So move them to space.
Right. By moving the servers to space, Musk argues, they can utilize unlimited, unfiltered solar energy via massive deployed arrays, bypassing the constraints of Earth's power grid entirely.
Let's aggressively push back on the physics of this proposal, though.
Please do.
We just discussed earlier how AI memory chips generate intense heat. An NVIDIA H100 GPU cluster on Earth requires massive, energy-intensive liquid cooling infrastructure and industrial air conditioning just to prevent the silicon from literally melting itself.
Right.
Space is a vacuum. In a vacuum, there is no air to facilitate heat transfer through conduction or convection. Heat can only be dissipated through radiation, which is an incredibly slow and inefficient process governed by the Stefan Boltzmann law.
So the chips would just overheat.
How do you possibly dissipate the localized thermal output of a supercomputer in an environment with zero thermal mass? The physics seem fundamentally unviable.
And your skepticism regarding the thermodynamics is precisely mirrored by the legal disclosures required by the federal government. There is a vast chasm between Musk's visionary pronouncements on social media regarding Dyson swarms and orbital supercomputers and the rigorous, legally binding language of an SEC S1 document.
Because falsifying capabilities in an S1 constitutes severe federal securities fraud.
Exactly. Within the filing, SpaceX's legal team quietly issues profound disclaimers, explicitly stating that the orbital data center initiatives are in the earliest stages of conceptual design, face unprecedented engineering hurdles, and, crucially, may never achieve commercial viability.
So if the physics of space servers are highly speculative, what are institutional investors actually buying for $1.75 trillion? They aren't buying a science fiction concept.
No, they are buying an existing dominant monopoly.
They are buying Starlink. The leaked Q1 2026 financial metrics within the prospectus illuminate the true economic engine of the company. The legacy rocket launch division, the Falcons and Starships, actually registered a net operational loss of $662 million.
The rockets lost money.
Yes, and the newly absorbed XAI division is a massive capital sink, burning through an estimated $2.5 billion in research and hardware acquisition.
But the telecommunications division, Starlink, is printing cash.
Exactly. Starlink, operating a constellation of thousands of low Earth orbit satellites, has secured over 5 million active paying subscribers globally. That division generated a pure operational profit of $1.2 billion in a single quarter.
Wow.
Starlink is the high-margin, recurring revenue utility that financially underwrites the losses of the launch business and funds the speculative AI research.
And that telecommunications monopoly has profound implications for India. Starlink has been aggressively negotiating expansion into the Indian market, forging strategic infrastructure partnerships with domestic giants like Reliance Jio to provide satellite broadband to remote regions.
It's a major move.
Simultaneously, SpaceX's absolute dominance in the commercial launch sector, primarily through their reusable Falcon 9 architecture, has radically deflated the global cost per kilogram to orbit.
And this extreme price compression has created a strategic crisis for the Indian Space Research Organization. ISRO's legacy launch vehicles are struggling to remain commercially competitive in the international satellite launch market.
It's a real threat to them.
This pressure is the primary catalyst forcing ISRO to desperately accelerate the development of the next-generation launch vehicle, the NGLV, a heavier, partially reusable system designed explicitly to counter SpaceX's monopoly pricing.
The pursuit of artificial intelligence supremacy is literally pushing corporate infrastructure into orbit.
Yeah.
But back on Earth, this exact same technological arms race is fracturing the global geopolitical order, forcing nations into controversial new alliances to secure the physical hardware that makes AI possible.
It's all connected.
Let's analyze our final topic, the formation of Pax Silica and the geopolitics of tech sovereignty.
Pax Silica translates literally to peace through silicon. It is the formalization of a new, highly aggressive multilateral architecture. It is a United States-led coalition comprising 13 allied nations, including major technological powers like Japan, the United Kingdom, India, and most recently and controversially, the Philippines.
The diplomatic language describes it as an alliance to secure resilient semiconductor and artificial intelligence supply chains. But strip away the diplomatic veneer, and this is explicitly a geopolitical fortress constructed to isolate and contain the People's Republic of China, right?
The alliance is a direct structural reaction to Chinese economic statecraft. In late 2025, Beijing escalated the ongoing tech war by imposing severe unilateral export controls on a portfolio of critical rare earth minerals, specifically targeting gallium and germanium.
These aren't just obscure elements. They are the absolute prerequisites for advanced semiconductor fabrication and fiber optic telecommunications. And China currently controls the refinement and export of over 90% of the world's supply of these specific materials.
When a single strategic adversary controls 90% of a foundational input, the entire global tech economy is vulnerable to sudden, catastrophic disruption.
Right.
The U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce defined the threat matrix with absolute clarity, stating, when 90% of a critical input comes from one country, you do not have a supply chain. You have a hostage chain.
A hostage chain. That's powerful phrasing.
The entire strategic premise of Pax Silica is to rapidly decouple from Chinese mineral dependency and build an alternative allied supply ecosystem.
Which brings us to the explosive controversy surrounding the expansion of this alliance into Southeast Asia. The flagship infrastructure project of Pax Silica is a massive 4,000-acre artificial intelligence and semiconductor industrial hub proposed for New Clark City in the Philippines.
A very strategic location.
The location is deeply symbolic. New Clark City occupies the footprint of the former Clark Air Base, which was the largest American military installation outside the continental United States until the Philippine Senate historically voted to expel them in 1991, reclaiming their absolute territorial sovereignty.
And the historical echoes are generating immense friction because of the specific operational demands made by the United States. To facilitate the construction and administration of this new AI hub, the U.S. State Department formally petitioned the Philippine government to grant absolute diplomatic immunity to the American corporate personnel and technical administrators operating within the facility.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that demand. Diplomatic immunity implies that these individuals would be entirely exempt from the jurisdiction of Philippine law enforcement, and taxation while operating on sovereign Philippine soil.
It is an extraordinary overreach.
The U.S. is essentially proposing to build an exclusive, hyper-advanced technological enclave, but demanding that the host nation surrender the legal authority over that territory. Critics within Manila's political establishment immediately branded the proposal Pax subservience, arguing it was a stealth mechanism to reestablish an American extraterritorial footprint under the guise of technological investment.
The Philippine government, acting through the base's Conversion and Development Authority, issued a flat, unequivocal rejection of the immunity request.
They didn't back down.
No, they asserted that while they welcome the capital investment and the integration into the allied tech supply chain, the facility and all personnel within it will remain strictly and absolutely subject to the sovereign laws and jurisdiction of the Republic of the Philippines.
This confrontation in Manila serves as a profound, real-time masterclass for India's own geopolitical strategist, doesn't it?
It is the defining diplomatic tightrope of the decade. India is a foundational architect of the Pax Silica alliance. We are leveraging this alignment to aggressively attract Western semiconductor capital.
Right. We are securing agreements with the Netherlands to import advanced ASML lithographical machines.
We are partnering with American firms like Micron to build the ATMP facilities in Gujarat. We are integrating our domestic conglomerates like Tata into the global fab ecosystem.
However, as the Pax Silica alliance matures, the United States is increasingly attempting to mandate the internal policies of its member states. We are seeing proposals like the MKCH Act in Washington, which aims to legally coerce allied nations into exactly mirroring U.S. export controls and trade restrictions.
The Philippine rejection of diplomatic immunity demonstrates the critical boundary. It illustrates exactly how a rising, non-aligned Indo-Pacific power must operate.
How so?
India must continuously extract the necessary technological transfers and capital investments from American partnerships, while absolutely refusing to compromise its internal legal sovereignty or its strategic autonomy to engage with other global actors.
So let's pull all these threads together. We began by talking about the hidden wiring of the modern world. Today, we've traced the voltage through those wires, watching how systemic breakdowns cascade across borders and industries.
It's all deeply connected.
We saw how the logistical failure of a digital exam in Puane shatters students' faith in meritocracy. We mapped the exact mathematical journey of how a blocked maritime strait in the Middle East forces the RBI to burn billions in reserves, which spikes the cost of diesel, which ultimately makes the tomatoes in your local market more expensive.
From shipping lanes to grocery stores.
Exactly. We explored how the physics of semiconductor fabrication and the voracious appetite of Silicon Valley AI models restrict global memory supply, threatening to wipe out the budget smartphone and stall India's digital inclusion. We analyzed the profound socioeconomic paradox of attempting to engineer demographic growth without supporting female labor.
And the CBSE disaster.
Right. We witnessed the chaos of throwing unpiloted digital scanning software at millions of high schoolers. And finally, we looked at the incredible extremes of tech ambition, from a corporation trying to bypass the laws of thermodynamics with a $1.75 trillion space network to global superpowers attempting to bypass the laws of sovereign nations to build an anti-China silicon fortress.
The overarching theme connecting every one of these crises is the immense vulnerability of our complex systems. It leaves us with a critical, defining question to analyze moving forward. Throughout this entire deep dive, we have observed institutions repeatedly pitching technology as the absolute, frictionless solution to complex human problems. Digital portals to stop exam leaks, AI supercomputers to revolutionize the economy, orbital servers to solve energy limits, and engineered supply chains to secure global peace.
Right.
But when we examine the actual implementation, the memflation, pricing the vulnerable out of the economy, the digital portals collapsing under the weight of desperate students, the demands for legal immunity overriding national sovereignty, you are forced to confront a disturbing inversion.
Go on.
At what precise moment does human policy stop directing the advancement of technology and the demands of the technology begin dictating our human policy? And when that structural flip finally occurs, who is actually in charge of the system?
A profound and unsettling question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanics of the systems around you, and we'll see you next time.